Welcome to CEC online lecture. Students, in this session we shall be learning about the next stage of the selling process, that is sales presentation. Now, how can we define presentation? Students, this can be understood as primarily a discussion by the salesperson on the features of the product or the service being offered. In a way, the salesperson makes an attempt to highlight the advantages and benefits of the product or the service to the customer. It is important for us to understand that presentation is the main body of sale. The salesperson now tells the product story to the buyer. Throughout the presentation, the salesperson emphasizes the customer's benefits, calling attention to product features as an evidence of these benefits. A benefit again can be understood as an advantage, such as lower cost or less work that you have to perform as a result of using the product, more profit, savings for the buyers. So a feature is a product characteristics like the weight or the size or the packaging. A common selling mistake which is often encountered and is made by the salesperson is to dwell on the product features or to talk about the product orientation instead of talking about the benefits that the use and the consumption of the product would bring to the customer. That is, we need to understand that the salesperson should emphasize and should practice on the market orientation rather than on the product orientation in this stage. Now, learning about the objectives of the presentation, students, the first and the foremost objective of making a sales presentation is to make the prospect aware of the problem or the need. It is very important in those situations where probably the product is new or the prospect himself is not aware of the underlying need. The second main objective is to prove that your proposition will solve that particular problem or the need which is being faced by the prospect at that point in time. In a way, one has to prove that your company and the brand is actually worthy of providing you with a solution to satisfy the need or the problem. Another objective which is being served by making a sales presentation is to motivate or persuade the buyer or the prospect to act promptly to buy that particular product as a solution to his or her problem. Now, it is often seen that sales people practice a number of strategies, the sales presentation strategies, in order to make their presentation effective. So primarily in this particular section, we shall be discussing about the various presentation strategies that can be used by the sales people. The first important strategy in this regard is the stimulus response strategy. Now what happens is here, students, the stimulus response strategy, they call for a stimuli that is presented in such a way so as to elicit favorable response from the prospects. At the same time, an attempt is being made by the salesman to lead the prospect towards the sale, that is the closer of the sale. The technique is widely used for training the new salespeople. So what you do is the product is being served or is being shown or is presented as a stimulus, and you try to elicit a favorable response, which is the purchase of that particular product as a solution to the problem or as a satisfaction for the need which is being felt by the prospect. Another presentation strategy which is often used by the salespeople is using the formula. Now, what are the formula strategies? They focus on the products being offered rather than on the need. So if one has to draw a difference between the stimulus response strategy and the formula strategy, where you find the stimulus response strategy to be focusing on providing a solution by focusing on the prospect's needs, the formula strategy basically focus on the products that are being offered. Now, they do have such a kind of a formula strategies, they do have an advantage of encouraging the prospect involvement. Now, one commonly employed formula strategy is the ADAS. This is the theory that we have already done in one of the previous sessions, where we talked about the ADA theory, saying that this is an acronym which stands for attention, interest, desire, and action. Therefore, what we are doing in the formula strategy, we are trying to move the prospect in a logical manner through 4 mental stages, where you first of all try to draw the attention of the prospect, then you try to elicit his interest in the product, desire in the product, and finally you propel him towards the action, that is the purchase of the product. Now, the sales representatives must capture their prospects' undivided attention and should try to arouse their interest by describing the benefits of the products, the features of the products, the advantages of the products to them. Now, once you talk about these aspects, it is naturally going to stimulate their desire because of the advantages or the benefits being offered as a proof in the presentation, and therefore would finally motivate the prospects or the buyers to make a prompt purchase action. Another strategy which is being used by the salespeople is the need satisfaction approach. Now, what happens in this strategy? The salesperson is now going to make an effort to discover the prospect's dominant needs or wants, right? Now, as some needs could be latent, they may not be properly articulated. Therefore, the salespeople should possess considerable selling practice, as well as he should be experienced enough to be able to get some idea about the needs and the requirements that might be faced by the prospect. Okay, now after doing all this and after doing this kind of a need assessment, it is also required that the salesperson should be a patient, should actually develop a patient approach. He should be a prospective listener, and he should also at the same time observe the body language of the prospect in order to fully comprehend and understand what the prospect is saying and feeling. Now, why we are doing this? So that out of that entire need set, one is able to make out the dominant need which you think your product would be able to satisfy, and therefore you would be talking about that particular need satisfaction in your presentation approach, because that is something, a satisfaction of that particular dominant need is what is going to propel the buyer a little more closer towards the action or the purchase stage. Also, students, this kind of an approach tends to be more appropriate when the potential purchase involves a significant economic and probably even a psychological commitment on the part of the prospect. So he or she would also like to make that kind of a commitment only when you would be able to present him that particular compatibility of the purchase of the product in terms of satisfying the need set, the dominant need for which he is looking for a solution. The fourth approach, students, requires a consultative problem solving. Now, what is happening due to its emphasis on the prospect's problem? Generally, it is found that this strategy, that is the consultative problem solving, is most frequently suggested. It is most frequently recommended in today's time. Now, the strategy focuses on the partnership of buyer and seller, and thus is most often used by sellers of the complex or technically advanced products. uh, what is happening, the salespeople in those situations where they are selling the complex technical products to the prospects, they need, or probably they seek to establish long-term relationships with the prospects that are in turn based on mutual trust, confidence and respect. Now, in applying this strategy, salespeople, they must make full use of their listening and questioning skills to understand what are the prospects' problems and what are their needs. No, it is as important for a salesman to be making an effective presentation, but at the same time also listening to what the prospect has to say. It is only when you listen carefully that you would be able to understand and also discover the needs and the problems being faced by the prospects. It's only when you have a complete idea of the need and the problem, you would be able to present a solution in the form of the purchase of the product. Now, techniques such as face-to-face prior meeting and in-depth research may also require to be undertaken in order to assess accurately what are the prospects' problems and the need or the requirements related to the product in consideration. Another approach that I would like to talk about here, or the presentation strategy that I would like to talk about here, concerns depth selling. Now, this is basically a mix. This is a combination of several presentation strategies. We have already seen that in some of the instances, there is no one strategy which may provide you a solution, and it is largely on the wisdom and effective appeal of the salesman to adopt a technique which is in accordance with the temperament, mood and the buying motives. So often it is required that they develop a combination approach. So a sales representative, he might start with probably a formula strategy like ADA, while also using probing and need satisfaction approach to actually discover about the buyer's motives. A salesperson can then turn to the stimulus response questions to encourage the prospect to think positively about the product, and finally may also adopt at the same time the consultative problem solving strategy to suggest some alternative solutions and win the prospect's confidence. So what we are doing, we have combined all the above strategies in order to reach out to the prospect in an effective manner. Or in other words, we can say, students, in order to make your presentation more effective in nature, one needs to effectively draw from the advantages of different strategies and then adopt a more compatible, comprehensive and probably a combination approach in order to present the product effectively to the prospect. Now, having dealt with all these approaches, if one has to outline the general guidelines which may work for an effective presentation, what can these incorporate? So at the first level, one has to ensure that there is proper participation. So prospects who actively participate in the entire process of that is the sales presentation and demonstration, they tend to retain more information and therefore they also tend to develop a more favorable attitude towards the product. So if you are not participating, probably you are not also paying attention and you are not listening to all those benefits and features arising out of the product in the presentation with a open mind and with that kind of an alertness which is required. So when you are participating, you are much more involved in the interaction, and therefore that is going to result into a favorable attitude that the prospect is going to cultivate about the product, because he knows and he is very much involved in that particular discussion. He is also participating by asking you certain questions and therefore would be in a position to retain that information better. The second guideline which can come handy for the salesperson is the association. Now, it is seen that prospects remember new information much better if they can connect with it. And also they are able to draw some linkages of the information with their knowledge, their personal knowledge, their probably past experiences, their frame of references. Also, prospects who see the products being used in certain situations similar to their own situations can better visualize the benefits that they are going to have from the product, right? Instead of the situation where they cannot probably establish any association between their situation and what the product is going to do to them, or what kind of benefit the product is ultimately going to provide to them. The third guideline, students, which I can talk about is the appearance. Now, what happens is that appearance forms actually an important part of the entire sales presentation. It is the salesperson overall appearance that tends to make an impact. So it is very important that salespeople, they should be given some sort of a training on how to groom themselves, how they can select proper clothes, what should be their body language, how they can cultivate a certain kind of a skill set while they are presenting, so that they stay calm, they are polite while they are presenting. At the same time, they also know what is to be presented, what is to be emphasized, and all this has to gel well with their overall appearance, because your overall appearance also tend to give you a certain amount of confidence. So if you are confident, you would also turn out to be, you will also would be more confident and convincing in your sales presentation. Above all, as I've already stated, it is very important for you to reflect an effective behavior and listening principles. So inappropriate behavior can solidify your presentation and demonstration. Similarly, a salesperson who projects a very poor listening abilities or listening attentiveness, or he tends to frequently interrupt a prospect when the prospect is talking, what is going on? He is going to give the impression of regarding the prospect's problems and needs as unimportant. So you should not be interjecting in between. You should be properly listening to what the prospect has to say, because it's only when you are aware of his needs and requirements and probably the problem that he's facing, only then you would be in a situation to provide a solution for the same. Now, arising out of this whole discussion, students, what I would like to talk about here is, I would be summing up the entire discussion by saying that companies nowadays usually develop 3 different presentation styles for their salespeople. One is, which is the oldest one, which we can understand as the canned approach. So what happens in a canned approach? This is a memorized sales talk which covers all the main point, which again is based on the stimulus response thinking that we have just now discussed. So the buyer is passive and he can be moved to the purchase stage by the use of right stimulus words or pictures or certain kind of actions. Now, this kind of approach is generally used when the salesperson resort to door-to-door or the telephonic selling. But at the same time, you are also looking at certain other advantages, because you have memorized a sales talk, so it is going to give a certain amount of confidence to the salespeople. You can utilize the tested sales technique that have proved to be effective in the past. It also gives salespeople an assurance that they are moving on the right track. It also provides assurance to the prospect that you are going to narrate a complete story, and in a way is going to simplify the entire training process. So the use of the canned approach at the same time does not mean that the salesperson cannot use his own script or his own words or cannot improvise. In many instances, it is seen that your individual thoughts and your individual initiatives should also be encouraged, and they are duly encouraged. Another approach, therefore, which has emerged from the entire discussion is the formulated approach, which again is based on the your stimulus response thinking, but identifies early the buyer's needs and the buying style. So in a way, what is happening in this kind of a formulated approach, you use a approach where the salesperson initially draws the buyer into the discussion. How? By revealing the buyer's needs and attitudes, and then the salesperson is going to move into a more formulated or designed presentation, which is going to show to the prospect as to how the product would satisfy those needs. So it is not canned, it is not pre-planned, but it generally follows a general plan, so to say. The third approach which we can talk about based on the presentation strategies that we have discussed is the need satisfaction approach. So normally what the salesperson is going to do in this case, he's going to start with a search for the customer's real needs, that is the dominant needs, and not the latent ones, by encouraging him to do most of the talking. So this approach, as I have stated, is going to actually focus on good listening and problem solving skills. So the salesperson is going to take on the role of a knowledgeable consultant, so to say, hoping to help the customer save his money or probably make more money by providing a compatibility of the product and its usage with the need set of the prospect. So essentially, we also see students that salespeople make certain claims during the presentation. So by use of various techniques, the sales representative actually is making an attempt to make true those claims, to prove that the claims being made in the presentation are actually right, they are actually true. If the prospect does not believe in those claims that the salesperson has made in respect of the product, the sales obviously is not going to happen. Now, then the basic question arises, should a salesman go in for an adaptive strategy or a canned sales presentation? Now, as we have seen that adaptive sales presentation involves salesperson in adjusting their sales behavior to the particular prospect and to a particular selling situation. Whereas the traditional salespeople rely on a standard presentation that does not vary with different prospects or the customers, people who are more experienced and they have followed the other approaches over a period of time, those who have turned out to be successful salespeople, they generally, on the other hand, adapt their sales presentation to the customer needs and align it to the requirements of the customers and their temperament, so that the overall approach tends to become much more effective. Now, canned sales presentation is a polar extreme of the adaptive presentation, as it is very structured. It is like, we can understand it as more or less programmed. So while this works for some types of prospects and in some kinds of selling situations, the structured presentation usually faces the limitation of decreasing the sales person's role in the presentation. Why? Because you are going to move the presentation in a structured manner only, and you are not going to vent your own initiatives, and you are not going to improvise and adapt it according to the requirement. So you are just going to follow the script. Now, though it is up to the salespeople to decide as to which of the approach they would like to adopt, but the best presentation often is the blend of the two approaches. That is, you turn out to be, the salesperson try to be adaptive wherever required, and he sticks to the script and he follows the canned approach wherever that particular canned approach is likely to give him better results. So if you adopt a combination strategy by blending the two approaches, probably the salesperson is going to get the better results. So all in all, in this particular session, students, we have learned about the various presentation strategies and what these presentation strategies were. They were stimulus response strategy, formula strategy, need satisfaction strategy, consultative problem solving, or a blend of these in the form of depth selling. Arising out of these 5 strategies, I told you that the companies usually adopt an approach where they follow 3 different presentation styles. So they ask their salespeople to follow 3 different presentation styles, either a canned approach or a formulated approach or a need satisfaction approach. And finally, it is basically the sales representative who has to take a call as to whether he would adopt an adaptive presentation style or he would go by a canned sales presentation. And all in all, if you use a combination or a blended approach to reach out to your prospect, generally it is found that the presentation in those situations turn out to be much more effective rather than skewing it to any one particular kind of style, because every style has its own advantages as well as limitations. So students, at the end of this session, I'm sure you would have got clarity on sales presentation and the presentation strategies. Thank you. In the subsequent session, we'll be moving ahead towards the other stage of, or the next stage of, the selling process. Till then, take very good care of yourself. Stay at home, stay protected. Thank you.